everybody. Thank you everyone who's joining us tonight. Tonight my guest is Sarah Walker. I know many of you will know her, but for those of you who don't know Sarah, I wonder if you just introduce yourself, Sarah, and tell us a bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Sarah Walker. I've been around housing for a very long time. I've had a career basically in the housing sector, starting with councils, council housing, and working in homelessness, and then more recently working with registered providers. I've got a housing and development degree, and I've also got a project management construction degree, and I'm a chartered member of the Institute of Housing. So I often get involved with the green papers and plugging into the groups about housing policy and what we think we should do with the government, which I'm quite keen on housing policy, and I enjoy all that sort of work. So I do a bit with that as well. And I also work as a bit of a mentor and a coach for people that are interested in social and supported housing. So I cover both areas of work. But yes, I've been in housing a very long time. You know, I gave up my corporate career because I have a daughter with learning disabilities, and that's really where my interest to become more flexible around my work started. So yeah, that's a bit about me. But yeah,
I think the interesting thing about you, Sarah, is that you've seen supported living accommodation from so many different angles, haven't you? From the coalface.
Yeah, so I took a comment in the commissioning team for a while, which was commissioning learning disabilities accommodation that we needed for our local authority. So I've done it from that side for what you look for as a commissioner and sustainability of it. So working with RPs and fund. I've also worked on the funding, you know, how you get them funded and the funding of them, you know, whether that's through council used to offer us land, and then we used to pull in grant, and then we used to need a provider, or ourselves would work as a care provider, depending on the severity of the needs. So I've done all that, and then I've also work with my local authority in a very small scale. We do a bit of care leavers accommodation for young people moving out of foster care that need a little bit of help to transition into independent living, and I run that as the service provider. So I'm not the landlord leasing it to somebody else. I actually deal with the young people and get involved in their lives and help them and mentor them along their way, which my husband and I quite enjoy, really, for some strange reason.
More teenagers.
Yeah, well, that's what my husband said. He says it's like having 22 teenagers. We've got two of our own. And I'm like, yeah. I said, yeah, they are teenagers. Oh yes, they are, aren't they?
So you got into property for the flexibility, you know, from
yeah, really, for the flexibility, for looking for something that was more flexible to be around my daughter more, because it was obvious she's had 2 lots of brain surgery, and I was a senior project management for a big Midlands registered provider, and my job was covering pretty much the whole of the southwest, so everything from below Bristol across to Aylesbury and Buckinghamshire and back up to Birmingham. And I was delivering about 500 units with a team of project managers a year, and everything that went with that. So land acquisition, contract management, you know, scope of works, tendering, snagging, you know, the whole kit and caboodle. And that was just a bit inflexible when you needed time off and stuff, you know, because it's all deadlines, it's all target driven, it's exactly the same, you know. In a way it's the same, because you bid for the grant, you've got to use it in a certain time frame. The government don't want money left sat, you know, they want to allocate it, but if you've had bad weather or you can't deliver, or you know, things slow down on site, you know, there's always reasons why things don't quite happen in the you know, as in the construction plan says you should be this by this week, but you never are, you know. So I found that I did it for 9 years, but in the end I just thought, no, I'm not into this. And then my job became, because we became very big, you know, we were the second biggest RP in the country, and my job became very much about contract management. So I'd be working with people like Berkeley Homes, Taylor Wimpey, Bovis, you know, the big players, because economies of scale, you know, we wanted to buy 500 units rather than 2 units over there, you know. So my job changed a lot more to be about that, and I thought, I'm not a contract manager, and I never came into housing to do that sort of work. So looking for becoming self-employed, buying our own houses, trying to help as best we could our own local authorities with an angle on the support side, because that's my background. You know, I come from the housing sector, which has traditionally done the most vulnerable clients. And that's what led me to setting up my own business and running my own portfolio.
And you've got quite a mixed portfolio, haven't you, Sarah?
Yeah, so not all your eggs in one basket is my motto, you know. So I have got general needs accommodation, which is working people that any landlord out there that's in the buy-to-let sector would recognise that as you know, they're managing general needs properties. So I've got some of those in my bag, which are fine. I've also got some, I know you did Bromwyn a couple of weeks ago. She does the emergency accommodation. So I've got one house which is designed for that, which the councils use for that. And we run it as an emergency accommodation. And then I've got my little care leavers project that I run along with my local authority that we run on a pilot level. So I've not been commissioned. It's sort of, we'll try it and see how we get on, and we'll build from there if we like it, sort of model. So I run that as well. So yeah, so I've got several different things, and then I also do a bit of mentoring and coaching and training for people that are interested in learning more about social housing in general, with an element of the support and how to work with the sector, because it is a really big sector now overall. You know, there's a lot of opportunities for investors and landlords that are looking at doing things slightly different if they want to work, you know, whether it's with housing benefit tenants or supported living or the general needs side. Yeah.
So you're covering all that wide spectrum.
Yeah. So I'm a bit of a jack of all trades at the minute, really, because of the way the portfolio came together, really, more than anything else, you know.
And you were going to talk to us a bit more about your Care Leavers project, because that's the one that sounds particularly interesting. I know all of them are interesting, but that one.
Yeah. So I had this corporate job. And I thought, I'm going to give up and I'm going to start on my own, and I'm going to be wonderful. I'm going to be better than all the providers out there. Well, that was the theory. Anyway, so I went to see all my local councils, and I did know a lot of the staff. So to be fair, you know, we were on first name terms. I knew who I was talking to. I went in to see them and said, look, I'm giving up my corporate job. This is what I'm thinking of doing. Have you got a particular housing need you want met? You know, is there something that we can tailor our business to meet, you know, what you mean? And they said to me, oh, Sarah, we've got our Care Leavers provider is failing miserably. It's really badly failing. We're going to have to retender the whole kit and caboodle eventually, but would you consider, you know, doing some provision for us? And I went, okay, but I'm not a care professional. I'm not a nurse. I've got no registered background. You know, I'm not a carer. I can't really do knife crime. I can't do running away. And they went, no. We've got really good kids. They can't stay with their foster families post 16, and we just like them to have, you know, a little bit of move on accommodation. Now, move on accommodation is normally 2 years, is a sort of standard model that most councils run. So they come out of foster care, they go into 2 years into move on accommodation. Not all councils run that, but most should, you know, because they're legally responsible for them to the age of 23, although most councils don't acknowledge that, or a lot don't. And then they move on from there. So I sort of said, oh, okay, so what do these youngsters need? And they went, oh, they need everything, you know. So I said, oh, what sort of thing? Oh, they can't cook. They're under tight control in a foster home. Most of them haven't done very well at school. Some of them have never finished a full year at school. And I was looking at them thinking, my God, this is awful. Yeah, we know we're failing. We know the social services is, you know, whatever. What can you do? So I said, and I got this idea from when my daughter was very, very ill, and I had to live in Bristol Hospital with her for 9 months. Our marriage broke down. I mean, we're all right now, but at the time it broke down. So my eldest son went with his dad, and then my middle son was basically a child at risk because he couldn't stay at home on his own. He was only about 11, and my daughter was about 4. With the help of social services, actually, and my mum, because they'd have had to took him into care otherwise, we got funding to put him in a boarding school. So he went off to a boarding school for a couple of years, and I had a whale of a time, loved it. In this boarding school where they live, they have a house in the village, and then in their final 2 years, that sort of 15, 16 age group, they go and live there for a week, and they have to do all their own laundry, and they have to plan their menus, and they have to understand their electricity bill, you know, and they have to cook a meal for the bursar and the, you know, the gentry sort of thing, and they have to lay the table and do all the washing, like real simple stuff. And these kids have not had any freedom, because in boarding school, it's surprising, it's quite, we don't have a lot of freedom, you know, and everything's done for them, like everything to like putting their socks in pairs to everything. So these kids that were so well looked after really loved the freedom of learning that, you know, and it really did them a lot of good. So I really pinched it from the private sector, and I thought, why can't we bring that into the social sector for young people that are, you know, less advantaged, you know, than the public sector schooling. So they went, oh, you know, could you put together something like that? We can sign it off as a pilot. We'll get it signed off by our cabinet member, so we can work with it, you know, without having to go through the procurement, you know, legislation rules. So I said, okay. So I put together a little program, the 6 months where we run, they come in, there's a cookery school, a restaurant that comes in. It's not been on while COVID's been on. We've had to put a stop on everything. But before that, it was a cookery school came in and did 12 weeks cookery with them, and they all cooked together, and they learned how to budget. So that part of that was budgeting and planning menus and making sure they weren't wasting food, and how to manage what they wanted to do with their food and everything, how to cook, you know, not to rely on a microwave, not to rely on takeaways, you know. So that was one of the elements. The other one is I'm lucky enough, because my daughter, I'm lucky enough to have a housekeeper that helps me with everything. So she said, well, I'll go down and help them, teach them how to sew on a button, how to clean their shoes, how to iron a shirt for interviews, all that sort of stuff. So then somebody did all that sort of practical stuff. And then I had somebody who came and did stuff, quite a lot of stuff about money, including pensions, overdrafts, mortgages, you know, some of the stuff you need to live in a modern society, you know, not your times table, not the maths, you know,
No,
some of
the life
stuff. Yeah, some of the maths that you sort of need, you know, to work out what's a yield, even stuff like that. No, we didn't do stuff like that, but some of the maths that you would use in every day to know if you've got a good deal or a bad deal, you know.
So how many young people do you have there?
So we only have 6 at a time. They come in and they do the 6 to 9 months, depending. Some of the elements we run more than once, you know, like we might be in there a bit longer if they needed more help with maths, or they need more this, or they need more that. And then once or twice, 2 or 3 have done like a year, so they've done a whole lot again, basically, you know. A, because they didn't feel ready to move on, and B, they didn't want to. So along with that, they also have whether they're in an apprenticeship or a job of some sort. So all that is done as well, along with the job centre, and people like that are all involved in their, you know, what they're going to do, moving on from the supported accommodation, I suppose, really.
So it's kind of like a shared house, but with all that extra.
Yeah, so it is a shared house. It's like, I would say it's a bit like university students coming together in that shared environment. They're all sharing their lives together, but they're doing a bit more than that. They're learning from each other, and you know, getting to form friendships and stuff like that. So yeah, so then the idea of that, what I did say when we started it was, okay, I'm happy to do that, but then once we finish the program, you know, are they going to have somewhere to move on to? Because otherwise they're going to be stuck with me, and then I can't run the program, and they're not going to be able to move on. And they said, no, we can get it recognised with the registered providers, that if they've done the course with you, so they get a little certificate saying what they've done and everything, then it's recognised that they can have a tenancy in a housing association tenancy, or private rented, whatever they choose to do. But part of the sweetener is, if you do this, then you're more likely to get an offer of accommodation with a registered provider. So, and from doing that, the first year we ran it, because to start with we had 6 young people, and then we had 6 social workers. And I went, this is mad. Like, why can't we have a social worker for the house? The care plans are pretty similar. You know, we know they're going to do the program, unless they've got any really specific issues I need to know about, like they're epileptic or something's wrong, or, you know, they've got dyslexia or dyspraxia, whatever it might be. So we have a general plan for the house, and then we tailor it for the people coming in. We don't need 6 social workers. We can manage with 1, as long as they're up together with what's going on. So they reckon that first year, just doing that saved them about £30,000 on their social work bill.
Wow.
And they saved a lot more, because normally they'd be in accommodation like that for 2 years, and they were only with me for like 9 months.
Wow,
So
and yet you've got that really good outcome from it. From
yeah,
a short
so
period
they
of
were
time.
like, well, this is all right, this is working really well, we're saving money, we're
Yeah.
getting our kids educated and getting them the life skills they need. And we had one young lad come to us. He was a bit older, like he was a little bit older. He was 20, I think he was 21 when he came to me. He was quite late, really. And I was like, okay, well, he's a bit older than the others. You know, what's the reason for him coming in, you know, than the others? And they went, oh, because he's had 9 foster places in 5 years. So he's not even finished a year of schooling.
Wow.
I was like, however is he going to, you know? So we sat him down and sort of said, look, you know, you've left foster care, you're an adult now. This is a program that we've put together. We can get you on an apprenticeship. There's an offer for you, the apprenticeship. You want to do mechanicking. So that worked quite well. The job centre and the social work got him in there, got him an apprenticeship. And then now's your opportunity, you know, to get your apprenticeship and do your GCSE English and maths alongside that and set yourself up. And he went, yeah, I've had enough of this. I want to know that I've got a grip of my future, that I know I'm moving on. I can't bear this drifting about anymore. And he really excelled, you know, really went for it and really sort of took hold of it. In the time that we've been doing it, we have had 2 people that, we've had 2 young people that were probably a little bit too troubled to settle, really, to do the work that needs to be done. So they didn't stay long in the programme. But that's the only 2 that we've really had that we've had to, you know, social work have had to move in and move them on to somewhere that was a bit more secure for them, a bit more supported, really. Because they are living as independent adults with this support, you know.
Do they have 24-hour support, or is there support?
Yeah, there's somebody on call all the time, but I'm not going in there checking their rooms and checking that they're in at 10 o'clock at night. And you know, it's not a children's home like that. Do you know what I mean? It's not got that sort of regimented feel about it. You have to be at breakfast by 9 o'clock. None of that's there, which sometimes you get in children's homes. You know, so they are adults living as independent adults with this added extra layer of help, basically, and life skills. Yeah, life skills is exactly, you know, what it is. Yeah. So we run that on a very small scale. We only have 6 rooms in one of our houses. The council have said, you know, would we do some more? And we've both sort of said, well, you know, we like the work that we're doing. We don't want to end up with, you know, 40 or 50 children that we haven't got the time and to put into it ourselves, because we get to know them and we get to know what their aspirations are. And we spend we have a one-to-one coaching company that comes in and works with them on individual levels. I think they do like 5 sessions, like where are you now, where do you want to go, putting together a bit of a 5-year plan for them, I suppose, like we're all meant to with our businesses and whatever. You know? But where do you want to be? Right, what do we need to do to start that, and to actually start them seeing a bit of success from that, you know, from that plan. Wow. So yeah, so it's been an interesting journey, and it's nice if we can have a good mix of girls and boys. If we have too many boys and if you have a whole house of women, which we've done, it's not so good. And if you have a whole house of blokes, it's not so good. You know, you do need that mix is where you need to be. You do need that mix to get a bit of a balance with the interactions, you know. Yeah. Of it. So yeah. Fantastic. They're also expected to do a bit of their own, you know, cleaning and tidying and losing the washing machine. Real basic stuff, you know, like. What do I wash everything on, and what, you know, when you get a modern washing machine, you've got 100 wash programs on it. You don't need most of those. Yeah. Just use this one, it's fine. Do you know what I mean? But it can be a bit baffling for young people that have never had to do any of that, you know, never had to engage with anything like that, you know. And I know I've got 2 boys, and then the normal family, they sort of bring them up, and they sort of, as they get older, they take on more of the chores, don't they? They sort of get involved anyway. But these children haven't really had that. They haven't had that growing up in a family or environment where you chip in and you have to do a bit. You know, they've grown up in either foster homes or children's homes, you know. So really very different.
Yeah. Sarah, there's a lot of there's so much that we can cover talking with you about, but I know one of the things that people are really keen to understand is some of the history behind supported accommodation, and why there's such a need for it at the moment. Really, you know, how we've fallen into this place where actually property investors are providing accommodation for supported living, you know, and I wondered if you'd be able to help people understand a little bit of the background. It's not
simple. It is a complex story, but I will try and put it into a nutshell. Yeah, start again. Yeah, it's become more needed, should we say, or landlords could invest in it more, because like the organisation I worked for, the registered provider I worked for, were very clear that they were general needs providers, and a lot of the big providers now, whereas they would have done that more difficult clientele, are now looking for working professionals. So you can earn 120,000 and still qualify for a socially rented home. Okay, so they've moved their business model across, because we have lack of homes. We've got pent-up demand for 30 years. They've got lack of homes, so they've moved their business model much more across towards working professionals. You know, part of my job, this is just an EG, but as I worked as a project manager delivering new houses for affordable rent or for social rent, but part of that job was, we don't want 4 beds because they're going to be a couple with a lot of children, therefore they're going to need a lot of benefits. Are they going to be able to afford 80% of market rents? Probably not, you know. So my job was all about the business, sustainability of the business model, and they've moved away a little bit. There are some good ones out there that still do support, but you'll tend to find they'll have a specialist arm that does that. So you'll see their company will be, I don't know, Horizons supported living arm or something like that. So they have a specialist arm which will do less of this sort of work because of the demands on it. But then the councils who commission the services, really, so the money still comes from the council who commission the services. They split like the provider element to the supported element. So you either tend to be a landlord where you hold the properties, or you're a service provider. So I would say, although I do both in my property because I own my properties, I'm definitely a service provider for my care leavers. You know, that's front facing, that's dealing with my young people, that's not worrying about the landlord function, that's not about worrying about the cares, the repairs and the maintenance, you know. So there is a definite split. And you know, there's come about because there's the need hasn't gone away. So local authorities still have statute for dealing with learning disabilities, dealing with people leaving care, dealing with alcohol and drug abuse, as well as general needs. You know, they've still got to meet, you know, the people on the waiting list, you know, they've still got all that to deal with. But they've kept all the statutory duties around housing. But as everybody will know, a lot of councils have sold their housing. So they've still got all this duty to house people, but nowhere to house them, you know. So that's why it's become more difficult for councils to find good quality supported accommodation. I would say it needs to be a tri-party thing, really. You've got your commissioning team in the local authority, you've then got your RP or your specialist provider, so that someone like myself who does the service delivery to the client, and then you need the landlord almost at the back end of that, who's got the property and prepared to lease it for a long term into that sector. Because don't forget, it's their, you know, if you've got somebody with learning disability, it's meant to be their permanent home. They don't want you coming along after 5 or 3 years saying, oh, I want my property back, because you know, that's just not fair on the people that you're trying to house, you know. So traditionally, councils are reluctant to use the private sector for this sort of work. You know, they've been reluctant to use the private sector, but because of the way they commission services to the service providers, so they commission the front end service, so you're paid either per client for supported housing, or you're paid, you know, for the number of hours of care you provide. You know, you're not really paid for the landlord service part of it. The way it's been split up, you still need that landlord service to feed in at some point. So yeah, so that's some of the reasons as to why, you know, because yeah, there are good RPs out there that still do the supported housing, and if you're interested in letting your property into that sector, then you have to do the work. You have to find, I always teach people to talk to their local authorities first, through their local councils, find out who is your adult social care counsellor, talk to them, about what their needs might be, then find your registered provider from there, because the money will always come from the local authority. You know, the money always comes at the back from the local authority. So if you can get your tap in there early, then they will help you find a suitable registered provider, or sometimes they have a list of what's called preferred partners. So then they will say, okay, these are our list of preferred partners. These are the ones we work with and are commissioned either on our framework or through our DPS, direct purchasing system, or through whatever system it might be that they operate. And then you can feed your properties in there if you're able to get a good, a good RP or a good provider. It doesn't have to be an RP. It can be so I operate as a CIC.
Which stands for what, Sarah?
Community interest companies. Yeah, community interest companies.
What does that mean for people who don't understand that?
Well, we are very similar to registered providers, but we haven't gone through the onerousness of doing the regulation. So we operate as a non-profit business. So we don't take share dividends. We only take wages.
Yeah.
Yeah, we take
the
wages.
Structure's set up like that. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's set up like that. So you can have charities, you can have CICs, but obviously your best bet is your RPs, because they're properly funded and they're properly resourced to run these sort of services. But yeah, any of those three. The Midlands, I know that we have quite a lot of people in the Midlands.
Yeah, we've got quite a few people. Yeah.
Yeah, the West Midlands is a bit of an area all of its own, really. So as well as the commissioning teams, which is where I work through normally. I work through commissioning, and I know yourself, Lisa, you're doing stuff with commissioning officers. The West Midlands Birmingham themselves have got 10,000 people on their waiting list, so they've got a massive issue. So they there's another route. You can work through what's called exempt accommodation, which is a housing benefit route. So you can become an exempt accommodation provider, which is also seen, the definition under exempt accommodation is you must provide care, support and supervision. Okay, right. So care, support and supervision under exempt accommodation.
What the landlord should, or the package?
The provider should.
Right.
So someone like myself can apply for a property as exempt accommodation. Has to be non-profit, so you can't do it as a business, but it's uncapped. It's basically the rates are uncapped. So yeah, you can get up to £1,000 a week per room under exempt accommodation. Now, caveat that heavily by saying, there is somebody in the benefit office at the council that agrees the rate. So you have to show your service charges are this, your rent is this, your cleaning is this, your overnight care is this, your hours of support are this, and the average rate of support in your area is 10.22 an hour or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? So it has to be very clearly stated what you are doing for that amount of money, and then who you expect to house, on the exempt accommodation rates. Now, exempt accommodation rate is used a lot for homeless provision, to get, especially during the COVID, to get people off the streets. Then homelessness is one of the categories that fits supported living. It's just one, basically, but homelessness tends to be generally seen as a supporting living use of exempt accommodation, because they're not going to be homeless forever, are they? And they're not going to have a learning disability forever, so the idea is that they'll probably come into there for a while, get back on their feet with the right care and support and supervision to be able to move on into private rented or, whatever. Do you know what I mean? So you're
in a way that the learning disability isn't like that, but their homelessness is. Is that what you're saying?
The homelessness, you're moving them through the system, aren't you? So this high rate that you can get for exempt accommodation is while you're transitioning through the system. Exactly right. That. Which is, if you're doing learning disabilities, perhaps, or you're doing women fleeing domestic violence, or some of the other groups that aren't seen as quite so transitional, not quite so through-putty, So
they might not apply for that exempt status. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. No, they tend not to. Councils tend not to like exempt accommodation status for things like learning disabilities, drugs and alcohol, they prefer that to be commissioned through a service with the local authority.
Okay. But the West Midlands is what they're keen at, they're more willing to use that exempt status.
Yeah, just because their needs are so high, you know, and they're so desperate for all types of accommodation that they tend to be more acceptable of allowing exempt accommodation, you know, to run, really.
Right.
So exempt accommodation, you can run that if you're a registered provider, you can run that if you're a CIC, you can even run that if you're a private landlord, but you know, you've got to apply for that and you've got to get that recognised that you are doing the work, basically, that you're doing the care, support and the supervision.
Right.
You know? So yeah, but it's a benefit. It's a benefit regs is really where it fits. It's to do with benefit legislation and benefit law and benefit caps. So most RPs that you work with would say, well, your rent is the LHA bit, you know, the local housing allowance bit, because the other bit is for our care, support and supervision, you know. But you can get, sometimes you can get a bit more than that, depending on how much care and support is being provided and how that deal is set up. I don't work in the West Midlands myself, so I'm not a specialist in that area of the country. I work either in, you know, the southwest is where I work, and I tend to prefer to have direct connections with my elected members, that commission services and commissioning teams, you know, and then housing officers, you know. So yeah, and then those people will sign off, you know, eventually, you know, what sort of rates and stuff that you're able to get. But yeah, it is complex. It's a complex issue because there are several ways of doing it, and depending on the services you're providing, there are several ways of funding it. So you can either fund it directly through the housing benefit, or you can fund it through more traditionally, which is a tender type arrangement with a commissioning officer in your local authority, which tends to be more of the traditional route that councils prefer to work. They prefer to work like, this is the spec, this is the care we want, this is the provision we want, you know, we want individual use. A lot of them do single, you know, like we're trying to move away from the Winterbourne home, you know, where you get 30 beds.
Like huge institution kind of.
Yeah, what they call institutionalised care, you know. I mean, I mean, there's always elderly care, that still runs for elderly care. And you have for elderly care, you have a dynamic purchasing system where you basically, as that old person's coming, I mean, it's a bit horrible really, but let's say that old person's coming out of hospital, right, and they need to find a care place for them, you bid for that person, and if you're the cheapest, you get that old person in your care home. So it's a bit of a
spirals down, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's the councils do it for competitive tender. So elderly people care, that's a whole different
we won't get into that, that's far too complicated.
That's a whole different ball game again, but sometimes that's seen as supported housing. But the main supported housing is the homelessness, learning disabilities, physically disabled, and you know, drugs and alcohol, rehab, fleeing domestic violence. I'm doing this up on my head now, but there's about 12 or 14 client groups that will work with supported housing. But you need to be sure that you've got a good service provider that can manage that for you, and you know that you're who you're building it for, you know. So we've done, in my past as a project manager, we had a family in a local authority area that had a severely disabled, really disabled son. They didn't want him to go into institutionalised care. So the council, and he was in a council house, so they moved them out. They knocked down the house that they were living in. We applied for funding and we built them a purpose-built, disabled, fully adapted, fully compliant bungalow with a sleeping room for a carer, you know, for this adult disabled child, you know, so that they could still have a family life. And so that disabled child wasn't put into an institutionalized care home, you know. So And that was all commissioned by the commissioning team, by occupational therapy, social services get involved. I mean, the list can be...
Imagine how long it took to get that sorted.
Yeah, absolutely huge. But much more about tailoring the services to meet the needs of like the client comes first, the person comes first, really, and then we all fit in to fit their needs, if you know what I mean.
And that's, if you can get that, that's perfect, isn't it? And I think that's where a lot of people, when they're saying, oh, I've got this 20-bed HMO, I want to do it for supported living, that doesn't necessarily fit what the needs of the client group are. Sometimes it can be.
Yeah, sometimes it can do, but then it's about finding out who is going to need that and who is going to use that, and how much you're going to earn for that, because I should imagine you won't earn very more than normal LHA rates, you know, and as long as you can make it work for that and you're not over leveraged, you know, you might be better off running it yourself as a HMO. But yeah, they don't tend to like the big commercial stuff for supported living anymore.
Not huge ones, no.
Yeah, it's much more moving towards individual flats with so we used to do 8 to 12 flats with a care flat. So a bigger flat that would be a communal flat, and also able to have a carer there to support the 8 or 10 people that were semi-independent. You know, they were semi-independent, you know, they could do sort of stuff. It's a bit like my daughter now, you know, she's 13, so we're training her, you know, how to make a sandwich and how to get herself dressed. And she finds all that really, really difficult. You know, she's got a mental capacity of 4, but, and she'll probably never be able to live independently. Like, she'll always need 24/7 care of some description, you know. But it's helping those people that can do, like, I can shower, I can do it myself, mummy, you know, ensuring that they've got the facilities to become independent, and you're not institutionalizing and you're not doing it all for them, you know.
That enabling is so important, and getting
so the way the services are changing is much more about empowering the client to be an active member of society as much as they are able to, you know. So you're not excluded from things because of your physical disability or your mental disability. You know, you're not excluded from a club or joining things or education, whatever it might be, you know.
It's all about much more, absolutely,
trying to be much more person-centered, I suppose, is the approach. I see it as.
Sarah, I can see there's loads of questions coming in, and I'm sure people are going to have more questions for you, so we maybe need to start attacking some of these questions and seeing what people are saying.
We'll have a go
And see what we can get to. Right, let's just have a look through. So bear with me. Right, great to hear an insight into supported living. We're planning to contact our housing officer in our local housing LHA local authority with a hope to be able to help with the provision of supported housing, I think he means by SH. But as a landlord, how does it differ with regards to providing property for social housing as opposed to supportive living?
Okay, so your best point to always is the address of the property. If you've got a property that you've got in mind, you've got the address of that property, go on the website for the local authority and look up the ward councillors. Don't matter what colour they are, there will be possibly 3 ward councillors. Email them, say, this is who I am, you know, I'm a landlord looking at diversifying or supporting the council in meeting its statutory duties. You know, can you put me in touch with the commissioning team or somebody in housing services that can help me, you know, use my property for, you know, what the council needs. And with any luck, if they're any good, they should be able to come back. They'll CC you in, they'll CC in the line manager, whoever, but they'll reply to you saying, I've contacted Mr. Jones, Housing Senior Management, you know, they'll be in touch shortly. So then you've got the email address of somebody senior, and, you know, it's moved you on a step. What you don't want to do, a lot of people do make the mistake of going into ringing up the customer services desk and saying, I've got a property, you can rent it, and they're going, you want to apply on the waiting list? You know, they'll be like, I'm sorry, you know, because that doesn't happen.
To the phone.
You know, that doesn't happen, and you'll just go round and round the houses because they won't understand what you're trying to do. So you need to try and go in at a senior level and talk to them about the needs. Now, you can still do, we're talking about supported housing, which because of the support you're providing, gives you a slightly above market rent, you know. But social housing works equally well. Some councils will do a direct rent to rent with you for a family home at sensible rates, guaranteed rent. You know, if you want to do the supported, slightly more involved, slightly more people in the team, takes longer to achieve, equally good results, you know, if that's what you want to do. But yeah, just harder to get to the right people.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple of people are saying, what does RP stand for? We did cover it at the beginning, but if you just want to run.
Yeah, so sorry, yeah. So registered providers, sometimes called registered social landlords, sometimes called housing associations. So registered providers, they are regulated by the regulator of social housing. You can go and look anybody up. They'll have a governance score and they'll have a financial viability score. Is my battery running out? Let me sort that out. Hang on, I just got to turn that off and turn my battery on. 2 seconds. I realised.
We definitely don't want you to disappear.
I didn't realise I was running out. Right, I'm back now. I'm really sorry about that. Please excuse me for that rookie error. Sorry about that.
Well done for spotting it.
Yeah, so but registered providers are it's very, very difficult to become a registered provider, and the reason for that is because any borrowings that registered providers have do not go on the government balance sheet. So you are seen as a local authority. You have to commission as a local authority commissions. You have to buy as a local authority buys. You have to apply health and safety and HR as a local authority would. It's not totally impossible, but it is almost for small organisations to become registered providers. But they're recognised, they've been around a long time, they know what they're doing. If you can get in with a registered provider, then that is the best route to delivering supported accommodation.
Perfect. Is there a way to find out how much each tenant group receive from the local authority per week?
Not easily, no. As we've just discussed, it's tenant-led, so it depends on the package that the person really needs. There are some basic things. I mean, if you go onto Shelter's website, all the basic LHA rates have gone up from the 1st of April. So if you go onto Shelter's website, you can find out what people are entitled to under housing benefit regulations. But that's just for housing, that's just general needs. Yeah, for supported living, it's very difficult. Because it's sort of belongs to that person. You know, it belongs to that person that you're helping. It's not really on general knowledge. It's not general release. You know, whereas, you know, I know my daughter would need 24/7. You know, somebody else might only need 12 hours during the day and they're all right at night. They wouldn't need any night cover. So it is tailored to the person. So that's very, very difficult. There will probably are some benchmarks depending on if you're northwest or if you're southwest, and RPs, if you're a registered provider, they do benchmark against each other, so they know what other organisations are costing these services at. You know, so there is some data collected around what these services cost to provide, but for us as a general public, it's very difficult to get those.
And as a landlord, there isn't a standard, because that's looking at the whole package, but even when you break that down, it seems to be massive variations from the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. As I was saying, some organisations under the exempt accommodation rules will pass some of that uplift on to the landlords, some won't.
Yeah.
So there it varies depending on how desperately they need the accommodation, really. And, you know, have they got a low needs client group that they can get a nice amount of money for that doesn't need many hours of support, in which case some of that extra cash you can pass over to the landlord for a good quality product, you know. So yeah, it's very difficult to know.
Would the RP be responsible for all maintenance, walls, roof, etc.?
Yeah, so that's called a full repairing and insuring lease. Traditional RPs, if you're delivering what they want, you know, in the way that they want it, they will sign a commercial under the I think it's the 1954 Commercial sort of Lease Act. I'm not a commercial property specialist, so don't ask me. But like you sign a lease for a shop or any other commercial lease, they will take on all of that obligation. But saying that, it has to be the product that they want and that they need, and they're going to take it on for a long time. So when I was doing that work, I did actually sign leases for 25 years. Wow. You know, we guaranteed all the repairs, all the insurancing, everything. But that was because we wanted that property. It was in an area, the local authority had commissioned the services. We knew we had the revenue funding to support the clients. You know, the only thing we didn't have was the property. So that's why we leased for a 25-year lease. You know, yeah. It's less likely to get the long leases now. You can probably still get them for learning disabilities and support like that, but they tend to come down to more like 5 with renewables, you know, break clauses and renewables in. So yeah.
Is supported housing different to supported living? Seems to be used for different meanings by different parties.
Supported housing and supported living are they're the same. They're exactly the same. They do what they said on their tin. The person who lives in that house needs some sort of support, whether that's support with coming off their drugs, support with getting a job, support with managing their bills, support with getting up in the morning like our teenagers, whatever that might be. Those two terms are sort of interchangeable, but yeah, they're the same.
Aren't exempt rents linked to RPs who build properties to help fund their development programmes?
Exempt properties are nothing to do with capital grants on forward funding. That is a benefit. That's benefit legislation. So basically, it was recognised that the local housing allowances, or the housing benefit element of housing benefit, was not going to be enough for anybody that needed support. So exempt accommodation means these people need care, support and supervision, and that will not be covered in the costs of a straight LHA benefit. So it's a benefit legislation. It's under benefit because it all comes from the taxpayers. It's slightly different than commissioning services because it's accounted for by the government differently, because it comes straight from the benefit, you know, it comes straight through the job centre rather than through your commissioning teams at the local authority. So where the government account for that money is different to where it accounts for the other money. But yeah, it has nothing to do with how many they're building or what they're building or anything like that. No, completely different. It's a benefit driven service. Exempt accommodation.
You're right, we've still got more questions. In the process of setting up supported living accommodation for care leavers, how many rooms are ideal within the shared accommodation?
Yeah, that will depend again on your commissioning teams, really, how many care leavers they've got, whether they've got a provider that's not doing very well. You know, again, go and talk to your commissioning. Somebody will give you the name of the commissioning team member who does learning disabilities or who does, you know, care leavers, and drop them an email and ask them, you know, and ask them what they're looking for, what they need, you know, because those sort of clients, they're looking for a permanent, you know, they're looking for a permanent home where they can become part of the communities. So I wouldn't like to say.
I think this is care leavers they're asking about. Yeah.
Yeah, care leavers. Yeah, similar again. I would say the same, but 6 is probably your maximum, really, because once you get too many, you're then running a children's home again, and it's more like being in an institutional home, isn't it? But yeah.
I guess it also depends on the needs of those young people. If they've got
exactly,
you might want a much smaller.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you say, go and find out. Someone's asking about the length of contracts. I think this is lease contracts, leases on properties, I'm guessing. Generally, someone's saying, are they generally 3 to 5 years? I think you've sort of covered that with.
Yeah, generally they are, but it's up to what you can negotiate. It's really up to what you're able to negotiate, how desperate they are for the accommodation. You know, if you want a break clause at 5 years, you know, to reassess what you want to do with your property, they generally tend to be between that length of time. You can get longer if that's what you want to do. You'd have to convince your registered provider that's their best bet as far as their business plan is what's the word, as far, because their business plan tends to be a bit like ours in 5-year cycle, so they might not want them to sign up for a long, you know, a long lease, because they're not thinking that far ahead. You know, they might not be on the framework for care leavers in 10 years time. Do you know what I mean? So
absolutely. And the other thing is also your financing. Some mortgage companies don't like those very long leases, actually. They prefer.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's slightly different for us, because I think they were unfettered, so they didn't have a mortgage on the property, so they would, you know, they were just parking it basically.
Can I check, if you only provide accommodation, how can you provide the flats, etc., on the LHA rate? I think you would be providing it on the LHA. You'd be having to prove that you needed higher than the LHA rate. Oh, I think she's gone. My understanding of that is that you would be providing it on the LHA rate normally, and you kind of have to build a case of why you need the higher rates. But we'll see if she comes back on. If not, I think we're nearly at the end anyway. I'm sure Sarah will come back in and answer any questions in the comments below. Sarah was going to share her contact details of how to find her and some of the things she offers. What I'll do is get her to drop the slides she was going to do and put them in the comments for everybody. I'm sure you'll agree it was a really valuable session. Went into quite a lot of complexity and quite a lot of detail, but I know that for lots of the members of the group, that's really, really valuable, and the kind of level that people needed to have a better understanding of. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.